So welcome back. I hope you had a great conversation with your mentors and that was a productive time. But now we're here to talk about, is graduate school key to your public service career? Can you afford it on a public interest salary? When should you go? Well, our next panelists, of course, cannot specifically answer these questions for you. They can give you some helpful tips and suggestions to help think through the possibilities of graduate school with a public service career in mind. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our three panelists. Presenting first will be Brianna Suarez, who currently serves as the International Admissions and Operations Manager at the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, otherwise known as APSIA. In her position, she guides prospective students to find the right graduate school program for their careers, works internally with member schools, and works with outside partners and employers on hiring qualified candidates for positions across multiple sectors of international affairs and public policy. As you know from following me on LinkedIn, I'm constantly retweeting the posts that APSIA has for all of our service scholars. So they're a fantastic resource as an organization. Brianna completed her undergraduate degree in international affairs and French at the French language studies at the State University of New York, New Paltz, and graduated with a Master's of Arts in Security Policy Studies from the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, specializing in conflict resolution and intelligence. Previous to her position at APSIA, she worked at Doctors Without Borders. Thank you so much for joining us, Brianna. Then next,
thank you for having.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Miriam Ingber, Associate Dean, overseeing the Offices of Admissions and Financial Aid at Yale Law School. She was previously the Associate Director of the Public Interest Law Center and Academic Career Programs at New York University School of Law, as well as a professor in NYU's lawyering and graduate lawyering programs. Miriam also worked as a senior staff attorney at Children's Rights, where she litigated civil rights, class action lawsuits seeking systemic reform of child welfare systems, and as a litigation associate in private practice. She is a graduate of Dartmouth College with Phi Beta Kappa honors and Yale Law School. As a Yale Law student, she was senior editor on the Yale Law Journal, an article editor on the Yale Journal of Health Policy, Law and Ethics, a Coker Fellow, and a member of the Lowenstein Clinic for International Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us, Miriam. And last, but certainly not least, we'll hear from Dorothy Bieberman, Director of Global Engagement and Executive Initiatives at the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. Dorothy is the Director of Global Engagement and Executive, Her portfolio includes directing ASPPH's engagements in global health and with global partners, developing strategic communications for the President and CEO, and managing the new Climate Change and Health Initiative, something of interest to many of you today. During her 13 years there at the organization, Dorothy has also supported public health practice, preparedness, and public policy initiatives. She has coordinated development of educational competencies and managed public health fellowship and internship programs. Dorothy received her MPH in Health Promotion and Disease Prevention from George Washington University's Milken Institute of Public Health through the Peace Corps Masters International Program, including 2 years of service as a Peace Corps volunteer in Belize. She is also certified in public health and has a bachelor's degree in biology from Brandeis University, where she received Phi Beta Kappa honors. So just again, in terms of format, each presenter will provide remarks, and then we'll devote the rest of our session time for your questions about graduate school. PBK team members will be on call to ask scholars to ask the question themselves, however. So thank you, and we're looking forward to a great panel.
All right, I guess I'll take it away since I'm the first speaking. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. As Anne mentioned, my name is Brianna Suarez, and I'm the International Admissions and Operations Manager here at APSIA. And just a little background on APSIA, if you don't know who we are, it's a consortium of the leading graduate schools that specialize in international affairs and public policy around the world. So currently with 69 members and affiliates in 18 different countries, you can virtually complete a master's, mid-careers, and PhD program at any of our APSIA schools. But today I'm going to focus really on that question, when is graduate school the right choice for you, how you should apply, how to find funding, and so forth. I'm unable to share my screen though, so I'm gonna wait for that. Great. All right. So I'll jump right in. I'll try not to last too long on the presentation because again, I think it's more valuable to hear from all of your questions and for us to better guide you today. But the first question really is, why should you consider graduate school? So many students tend to pursue graduate schools for a number of reasons. Some choose to go because of the changes in salary. So some positions do offer more money depending on what degree you have attained at that point. Some choose to go to graduate school because they actually want to master, as the title says, a specific subject. Some go for the career advancement portion. Again, there are certain fields that require you to have a higher ed degree, certain positions that are only open to those with higher ed degree. For example, those that are looking to work in state, you may get some clearances depending on what degrees you have. Some choose to go for the professional focus, but ultimately the question of why you should pursue graduate school really comes down to you, right? Where are you in your journey and why have you decided to go to graduate school at this point? And that without a graduate school degree, you won't be able to get to that next step in your professional career. And I can go a little bit more depth into that a little bit later, but one of the first tricks to really start thinking about is ultimately what is the career that you want to have, right? So for example, international affairs is such an interdisciplinary field that you virtually can do anything with a master's degree in international affairs, right? You can do business without having an MBA. You can work in energy and in the environment, security and intelligence. Space policy is now a thing, which I find very cool. You can do some law within international affairs without having a JD. Again, it really comes down to connecting your interests and thinking through what it is that you want to do in your day-to-day. And it's okay not to have an idea, right? Most people think that they need to have everything figured out once they've graduated, when in actuality, your life is going to do lots of turns and you're going to change from here and there. But really channeling again what it is that you want to do, what are you interested in, and what will make waking up ultimately worthwhile and going to your job in that at that 9 to 5, most likely. Right. So when you are considering graduate school, how is the application? So unlike the Common App, so unlike in the undergraduate, when you're in undergrad, there is no Common App. So that is to say you're applying to schools directly. So that's why we say that you should be taking at least a year when you're deciding whether you should pursue graduate school. And that's because graduate school really is a choice. It's not required of you, and it'll take a lot of components to put together an application. So the first thing you should be doing is determining which programs you wish to pursue, right? This is where we say you should be casting a wide net and doing your research. One thing I urge students to do is go beyond the rankings and go beyond the name of the school. Students tend to get hung up on the rankings and get hung up on going to a name brand school, when in actuality, there may be programs out there that are best suited to what you're interested in doing and what your interests are, and they may not be as well recognized, right? Rankings are another thing that schools can kind of find a way around and get into those rankings. So that's why rankings are not always a reliable thing to rely on for graduate school. So researching graduate schools, keeping track of your deadlines. Again, unlike in the Common App, there is no one deadline. Some schools have rolling applications, some schools have early applications, some fellowships and scholarships have early applications, much earlier than the applications for graduate school. So you want to make sure that you're tracking those in the best way possible. Understanding your financial situation. This is something that I'm going to be coming back to often. You need to understand where you stand financially before you apply, so that you understand what it is that you're looking for from a financial aid package. So that's to say that if you're coming from undergrad with loans, understand how comfortable you are with taking on additional loans. If you're not, then looking for programs that offer full aid if they are available, or looking at outside scholarships and fellowships to come to that program to supplement whatever financial aid package they are offering you. And then lastly, again, investigating financial aid options. Students tend to look for financial aid options at the very last minute. So usually they will be admitted to a school and that's when they start asking about financial aid. And at that point, it is often too late. Schools have already allocated all of their financial aid and have given out all of the scholarships available. So again, if it's one thing you do as early as possible, understand where you stand financially and what is it that you're going to be looking for from a financial aid package before you apply and before you're admitted to that dream school of yours. So, right. So if you're interested in graduate school, right, how can you start doing your research? How do you start navigating the process and finding that right program for you? The first question you need to ask yourself is, what will you study? And this is talking about the academic structure of the program, right? So are you someone that prefers a rigid program? That's to say you study X, Y, and Z and you get this one degree. Or do you prefer something a little bit more flexible, right? You're combining concentrations, you're ultimately creating your own degree. Do you prefer morning classes because that's when you learn best? Or do you prefer nighttime courses because you're going to be working part-time or full-time? Are you someone that likes the semester system versus the quarter system? Again, there's a lot of academic structures out there, especially now during the pandemic, as many programs are now starting to do hybrid programs or go solely online. You have to figure out what is the best academic structure for you and how you best learn. The second is, are you qualified? And this is talking about the admissions criteria of the program. Every school publishes their average admitted numbers, and these are good numbers to use as a guidepost. That is to say, they're a good indicator of what the average student looks like at that school. So it gives you an idea of what are the things you need to work on before applications, right? That's not to say that if you hit that GRE score that you're automatically in, or that if you don't get that, perfect GPA, that if you have a lower GPA that you're automatically discounted. Again, these are average numbers. So there are students that fell above the bell curve and there are students that were below the bell curve. These are, again, just ways for you to figure out what are the things you need to work on before you apply. The third is, do you like being there? This is talking about the living environment, right? I'm a city girl. I was raised in New York City. So a school, for example, in College Station, Texas was not going to be the right option for me. And vice versa. Maybe you're looking for something a little bit more suburban, right? Then a school, for example, like Columbia SIPA is not going to be the right option for you, right? So make sure that you understand where you are going to be located at for those most likely 2 years of your life. If you're unable to take a tour of the school, do a virtual tour. I used Google Maps when I was doing my research, just take a look around the area and see how I would be getting to school, what's around me so that I could get a feel of what the environment would be like once I got on campus. The fourth, can you afford it? Again, coming down to the financial situation. Understanding that that number that schools give you upfront is not the full number, right? So if a school says that it's $50,000 for a year, that's not taking into account books and supplies, transportation, right? If you have to move, moving expenses, living expenses, et cetera. So it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but understanding where you are financially, how much you can contribute to your graduate degree and how much you're looking for in aid will set you up for success a lot earlier than anticipated. And then lastly, it's another point that I'm going to be coming back to, what comes next, the professional fit. Think through why you're going to graduate school and what it is that this degree does for you realistically. If you have no idea, take a look at the alumni of the program and see what they're doing. A lot of people love to connect. So you can connect through LinkedIn, you can ask people for coffee or just to connect via Zoom and just chat through their degree, their process, where they are now. So you can get an idea of what it is you can do with that degree after you've graduated. I'll try not to last too long on these slides. Again, so as you prepare to apply, right, you're starting to figure out some schools that you're interested in. Start seeking out admissions counselors. Some of them are actually sitting on the admissions committee, so they can tell you outright what it is that they're looking for in an applicant. One of the questions you can ask is, what are the priorities of the admissions committee? So that you understand exactly what kind of student body they're trying to attract, who they're trying to attract, right? Those questions that are a little bit more targeted than when is your deadline, because they're most likely going to direct you to the website at that point. You want to finalize your list of desired programs. There is no right number of schools that you can apply to, right? If you feel that 2 are the best, you can apply to 2, you can apply to 5. Do keep in mind, it does cost money to apply to graduate school. So that's something to keep in mind, budget-wise. You want to identify any weaknesses in your application. Again, using those average numbers that school publish so that you figure out what are the things in your application that are weak at the moment before you apply. Taking any standardized tests if needed, such as the GRE, the GMAT, if the school requires it. beginning to gather outside materials for the schools, applying to outside scholarships if you have not done so already, and reaching out to potential recommenders. And I'm happy to go more in depth on the potential recommenders portion of it all, but I want to get through these a little bit quicker. So what does a graduate school application look like in general? I can't stress enough that all schools will vary, but you should be prepared to provide the following: an application form and an application fee. As I mentioned, it does cost money to apply, but a pro tip that we can give you is that some schools offer fee waivers, whether it's for something you've done in the past, such as you're a returning Peace Corps volunteer, whether it's because you've attended an open house, whether it's because you did so great in the GREs. Try to take a look on their websites and see what fee waivers are available to you so that you can save some money. You should be providing a CV or a resume. I hope you all know the difference, but if not, I'm happy to go over those. Official transcripts from each institution that you've matriculated into, especially if you've studied abroad for more than 6 months. Standardized test scores, personal statements and or essays, 2 to 3 letters of recommendations, and bank statements. Now, bank statements are not just for financial aid, they're also if you're looking to study outside of your home country. So that is to say, if you are a US citizen, for example, and you're looking to study outside of the US, you will need to provide your bank statements so that the school and the host country know that you're able to sustain yourself during the time that you're in country. And so how do you curate a good personal statement for graduate school admissions? So we like to separate it into 3 W's. It's the where have you been, where are you now, and where are you headed? The where have you been is where you start to outline your qualifications. This is the portion of the essay where you're talking through your work and volunteer experiences, coursework, languages, projects, really anything that you feel is influential to who you've become at this point. You don't have to linger too much on this point of the essay because they will have your transcripts and resumes on hand. But again, maybe there was an internship that you really loved and that, lent you an insight into how you could connect biology and international affairs. And this is the part of the essay where you should be mentioning that internship. Or vice versa. Maybe you had an awful internship, right? But it led you down this path into why you thought international affairs and, global health and your interest in that. Great, mention it in that essay, in that part of the essay, excuse me. It should lead you to the second half of where are you now? This is where you start to convey your passion. What do you want to study and why does this topic excite you? And ultimately, what motivates you to go to graduate school now? Not 2 years ago when a professor recommended it, not because the job market is looking bleak, not because you have nothing else to do and you thought might as well go to graduate school. Again, they want to see what about this graduate degree fills a hole in your formulation and where are you headed moving forward professionally, which leads you to the last portion of the essay, the where are you headed, explaining your goals. Why this school and why this program out of all of the programs you could have chosen, and what will you do with this degree once you have it? Again, how does this degree fit into your career long term? It's okay not to have an idea, right? You're not looking to have an answer of 5 minutes after graduation, I'm looking to work at the UN under OCHA as a monitoring and evaluations analyst. No one expects you to have your whole life planned out that much. There should be some understanding of what it is you want to gain from this degree after you've left the school. And I'm going a little fast on this, I apologize, but 1 month, right? You're finalizing all of your applications, you've applied to all your financial aid, scholarships, checking in with recommenders. A note on recommenders that I'd like to make is make sure you're reaching out to people that know you in a professional manner and or academic manner. So as much as your grandma may think you're the best person in the world, she may not be the right person to write your recommendation for graduate school, right? You're looking for people that you've worked under, such as a supervisor, a manager, or a professor that you've worked alongside that can speak to your abilities and your skills in an academic and or professional manner. Give them ample time, give them the prompts of how to give in your recommendation, make that process as easy as possible for your recommenders. Updating your financial plan if you have not done so, and submitting all requested materials. So what are some of the application mistakes that students tend to make in an application? The first is failing to follow basic instructions. Make sure you read everything on the website, you're following the directions to a T, and that you're not submitting things late. Making foolish mistakes is the second. Read your essays as thoroughly as possible, but have a second party and or third party read it as well, because I guarantee you're most likely making a mistake and missing something. And then lastly, not conducting an honest self-assessment of your skills, experiences, and interests. So if there are issues or gaps in your application, make sure you're mentioning it straightforwardly, that you're not avoiding it, because it will be obvious to the admissions committee and you will leave them with questions. You want to make sure that you're showing how you've grown from these issues or gaps, rather than leave them with the questions to the admissions committee as to what happened. Ultimately, what are schools looking for in a graduate school applicant? The first two are fairly straightforward: aptitude for study and a chance of success in the program. That's why they ask for your transcripts, to see how you've done academically in the past. The third is experiences and perspectives that will help others succeed. They are building a holistic class. So they are looking for people with different experiences that come with different interests, right? If you're interested in international affairs, but you're also interested in biochemical engineering, that's a good perspective. That's a different perspective than that everyone is going to have in the classroom, right? So you want to make sure that you're showing those different interests and experiences that you may have. And then lastly, again, a clear sense of professional direction, that you're ultimately going to graduate school, not because you're lost in the world, but that you understand what it is you want to do and how this degree fits professionally in your background moving forward. So I'm sorry to rush through this slide, because I know this is one of the most important ones, but paying for school. Yes, graduate school is expensive. I'm sorry to say that, and I wish it wasn't. But with that being said, there are a ton of ways to pay for graduate school. It really comes down to research, and take it from me as someone who didn't do my research as early as possible. I now in this position have found many scholarships that I would have qualified for had I done my research early enough. The first are merit and need-based aid. Know the difference. Some schools will offer both. Some schools will only offer one, and some schools offer neither. Research and teaching assistant positions. There are assistants provided by the central university, so you're most likely applying to a school within a larger system. There's sometimes money at the larger system. You can also work for the university. I know some students tend to choose that path, and the university will pay for most or all of their tuition at that point. And there are also external sources of funding. Grants and loans, know the difference. One you don't have to pay back, the other you sadly do, and scholarships. Now, how can you do your research for graduate school scholarships? You can do it in a host of ways. The first place I will direct you as a good starter page is the APSIA website. We have a good fellowships and scholarships page as a starter page there, but you can do your research based on your interests, your career track, right? So maybe you're interested in working with the State Department or the U.S. Agency of International Development. There's the Pickering, Wrangell, and Payne Fellowship, right? You can do your research on things you've done in the past. You can do your research based on your citizenship, research based on your nationality, based on whether you're underrepresented in a certain field, whether you're first gen, whether you're a woman, whether there's a host of things that you can do your research based under. It really, really comes down to doing it as early as possible. Many schools also have great resources on their page for financial aid and external sources of where to find other scholarships that they've taken in the past. And I'm happy to delve more into the fellowships and scholarships portion of it. But ultimately, what are the skills you should be building as you look towards graduate school and a profession moving forward ultimately? And even before you start applying to graduate school, what are the things you should be building? First is professional experience, right? It doesn't have to be a 9-to-5, it doesn't have to be an office job, but understanding, how to work in teams, having something that shows that you've worked in the past, whether it's volunteering, all of those things are professional experience. International is in parentheses because not everyone has the ability to go work abroad. But now that many opportunities are virtual, they can also be considered international. The ability to write well and speak to different audiences comfortably is extremely important. Make sure you're working on those skills, not just writing those 10-page papers, those 20-page papers, but learning how to write memos, briefing notes, speaking points, things like that. Understanding project management, how things come together. And then lastly, building your network. Making sure you're staying in contact with supervisors, alumni from your undergraduate institutions, those that you've studied with alongside, alumni, professors. Ultimately, you never know who's going to be able to write your recommendation or point you to that next job. So I know that I rushed through that presentation. Here are some links, but I'm eager to hear from your questions. I'm happy to delve back in some of the things I mentioned here, but I'm now happy to turn over to my fellow panelists. So thank you for listening to me for that long-winded presentation.
Thank you so much, Brianna. It wasn't long-winded at all. It was very comprehensive. And now we're looking to have Miriam follow up about law school.
Sure, if you could just let me share my screen, that'd be great. Thanks. Okay. Okay, there we go. Oh. Okay, yay. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay, so I'm really going to focus for like law schools are tricky because I don't want to talk too much about Yale Law School because we actually do things in a kind of weirdish way. So I'm going to try to focus more generally on the materials that are sort of more generally applicable to law schools in general. Some of this overlaps with what Brianna was saying. Some of it's a little bit different. And I'm not going to touch too much on the financial aid and funding piece, which I think is also critically important. That's also really different from law school to law school. There's only 2 law schools in the country that are need-based only, and we are one of them. Most law schools operate on a on a merit-based system. With some mix of merit-based and need-based aid. I just want to throw out before I forget a shout out to the Access Lex, ACCESS Lex, LEX scholarship database. In my view, that's the most comprehensive place to find external scholarships for law school that's out there. So if you are applying to law schools and you want to look for external scholarships, that's, I think, the best way to find them. So that's sort of just like a plug for at the Access Lex scholarship database. And I'm happy to answer tons more questions about law school financial aid afterwards. Okay, so these are, you can see up on the screen. I hope you can see. Brianna, I can see you, so you can see on the screen. Okay, good. Thank you for the thumbs up. We'll talk a little bit about the essays, essay basics, and then some of the writing pieces. They're generally personal statements and optional. Most schools, it's optional diversity statement, what we call addenda. I always say addenda is where judgment goes to die. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Letters of recommendation, and then resumes, which is very specifically a resume for law school and not a CV, which I know for grad school is sometimes what it is. Okay, so essay basics. So I always say this is the, again, like a lot of our judgment comes in is them getting the little things right. So formatting matters. We like to see it normal formatting, no, Comic Sans or whatever crazy fonts. Times New Roman, 12 point, normal size margins. Yes, we can tell when we say 2 pages and you're using like those squishy margins and the tiny font. Like when I'm reading 50 applications a day, I want double spaced, I want normal fonts, I want normal margins. Brianna's nodding. She's like, yes, we do. It's really important that there's a cohesive narrative. You should view your application as a book and every component as a chapter in that book. It should be non-duplicative throughout. You should make sure that all open questions are answered. So if one part of your application raises a question, make sure that it's answered somewhere else. So if, for example, you had a gap in your resume, make sure that you fill that gap in elsewhere. If it's something that will be noticeable, if you have a gap in your education, make sure that you're explaining what that gap was for someplace in the application, because we will notice those things. Please proofread. It's a sign of professionalism that's really important for professional schools. It's also okay if you find a mistake later. Don't worry, we get it. You make mistakes, we make mistakes. So don't freak out if there's like a single mistake or a few tiny mistakes you find later on. There's something in law school admissions called a why school X paragraph. So some schools like it when you include in the personal statement a like, why Dartmouth Law School. Dartmouth doesn't have a law school. It's where I went for undergrad. Yale does not, but it's important that you're tuning into what specific schools are looking for. So things like a Y school X paragraph or statement is one of those distinguishing features. It's something we definitely don't want to see. I'm a big believer in you know more about you and I know more about me. So you focus on you and I'll let me worry about me, but not all schools feel that way. And I think that's actually an equity issue, and you can ask me why if you're interested during the Q&A. Okay, personal statements. This is where you tell us all about you. I think a lot of what Brianna said really resonated. I actually always say it's a past, present, future, which I think is a different way of saying what Brianna was saying in terms of how to think about it. They can feel really stuck. So if all you're talking about is like why I'm going to go to law school and the kind of lawyer you want to be, there's no movement there. A really good personal statement is going to feel movement. So this is my background and identity, and that's what's driven me to law. Or this is the work I'm doing right now or what I'm studying in school, and that is how it's connecting to the kind of law I want to practice. You want to have some sort of movement through the personal statement. And often if you're thinking about it as past, present, future, it will have that kind of movement. It doesn't have to be like boring and chronological. I wouldn't think about it that way. I would think of it more as different domains and seeing which of those domains you might want to touch on and how to do that. Okay, tone matters. You don't want it to be really bland. I think some people use these consultants, um, and they can end up feeling very like edited to death to the point where they're just like so like sanded down of any personality. That can happen without a consultant too. It's more common with a consultant. You don't want it to go there, right? It's just like we kind of lose the sense of who you are. Um, but it also has to be professional. That's a really wide range. So not bland, but professional. There's a lot of runway in the middle, but make sure you're staying on that runway. Tone matters the most when you're talking about something sensitive. So it's okay to talk about sensitive topics, whether that's a sensitive personal topic, whether that's a sensitive political topic. Nothing is really off limits. The more sensitive, the more the tone becomes important, and you have to make sure it's a professional tone. Okay, what is a no-no? Don't talk about things that are super old. Like, look, if you had a super formative experience, like for example, your family, crossed the border, when you were a child, you can mention that and then talk about how that was the genesis of your interest in immigration law and you're currently working at an immigration nonprofit and want to be an immigration lawyer. That's fine. I don't want to hear about like your high school experience, like working at the zoo for like a page and a half out of 2 pages. It's just like not that relevant anymore to me. It's dated and it's just frankly a little bit irrelevant. So you really have to think about recency and relevance. The less recent, usually the less relevant it is to what you're talking about. Single anecdotes usually do not work. If you're focusing for two full pages on a single anecdote, that better be the best anecdote of all time, and it almost never is. So be really, really cautious about that. Anything cutesy is generally not good. Quotes, sort of running metaphors. So like, and then, my next step up the mountain of life, and then I reached the peak, and then I came to, terrible. We've seen it all. It's terrible. We've all seen the crazy things with the pictures and the photos and the text that's like covered in, black markups and you have to like lift it up somehow. It's all bad. You don't want to stand out. People stand out in bad ways, generally, not good ways. If you're going to stand out in a good way, it's going to be on the substance, not because of the cutesy things that you're doing. Always show, don't tell. Don't tell me you're interested in international human rights. Show me that you're interested because of your work experience, your coursework, the thesis you worked on, the extracurriculars you did, your volunteer. It just feels really inauthentic when you're telling, not showing. And if what you're showing me is a long history of corporate work and you're telling me that you're interested in international human rights, that's even worse. Make sure that what you're showing and what you're telling are matching. Or tell me a pivot story. Yes, I'm working at McKinsey, but what I realized is that this is not what I'm passionate about. What I'm passionate about was the volunteer experience I had at college working with a, child welfare nonprofit, and that's what I want to pivot to. You just have to make sure, like we read thousands of these, we've seen it all, make sure that it like makes sense. Okay. Diversity statements. I don't know if this exists in grad school. It's a big thing for law school. Different schools will have it. No, Brianna's saying no. Different schools will prompt this in different ways. The way Yale Law School does it is we say if there's an element of your identity that's core to who you are that's not otherwise discussed, we welcome you to talk about it a little bit. It's added as an addendum. It's not really an addendum. It's optional and really important for the people who choose to include it. And it's important for us to view you in the full context of who you are and to be able to review your application holistically and understand how you would contribute to our community. So that's what it's for. I think many people write absolutely beautiful and wonderful diversity statements that really add value to the application. If you're on the fence about whether to do it, you probably shouldn't do it, is generally the way I think about it. Okay. Addenda. So in law school applications, this is where people try to cover up their blemishes. Oh, my LSAT score is low because, and they make excuses. Or, yeah, my grades had this dip because. Again, this is where judgment goes to die. It has to be something really serious, something that is going to be, is a significant external factor that had a major impact on an important element of your application. So here's an example. This is true to me, so I always use this one. My junior year of college, my father passed away suddenly. This would be an appropriate addendum. My junior year of college, my father passed away suddenly. As you can see from my transcript, my grades were worse my junior spring and returned to their previous trajectory by my senior fall. Period, full stop. We see the craziest things. You know, my roommate broke up with her boyfriend, and I spent that semester counseling her, and it was really stressful for me because she was on long phone calls and I was distracted. Bad judgment. Like, that's life. I'm sorry, that sucked. Not an excuse for bad grades. I don't care about distractions during the LSAT. I don't, so many things that are just small and that raise concerns that if you couldn't manage that, how are you going to manage law school? It has to be a major thing that was external that impacted you. And that's what makes it worth it. If you can't describe it briefly and succinctly without drama, it's probably something you should be really thoughtful about whether it's worthwhile including. Keep it short, keep it simple, keep it drama free. That's the way to handle that stuff. Uh, this is, and don't draw attention to minor problems. That's the other thing. Sometimes it's something we kind of don't really care about, like, oh, you had one withdraw on your transcript. We didn't really notice it to begin with. And then you made a brouhaha around it. And now we're really focused on the withdraw. Most things probably okay just to leave alone. The one difference is something we call character and fitness issues, which come up in law school because you're going to have to eventually apply to the bar. The bar hears a lot about character and fitness. Your application is part of your character and fitness application to the bar. There can be no discrepancies between your application and what you tell the bar. So all law schools have variations on these questions about academic discipline, about involvement either in the criminal justice system. Different schools will ask it different ways. When in doubt, you must disclose. So even if it's a traffic ticket or a speeding ticket or an unlit candle violation in your dorm room, or you were caught once with, in the presence of alcohol underage, just disclose it. The more serious it is, obviously, you have to take full responsibility. There's nothing worse than someone who seems not to be taking responsibility for something. Own it, say you've moved past it, and that's okay. We definitely admit people with very serious criminal justice involvement. We've admitted people who have spent many years, many decades in prison for very serious things. We don't view anything as disqualifying on its face. The one thing that is disqualifying is when people do not take ownership and responsibility for prior misconduct or bad acts. That is something that's very, very concerning. So that's something that you'll see on these law school applications. Don't be concerned by it, but just be aware that you'll see it. Okay, letters of recommendation, super, super, super important because they're coming from someone else. So it gives us a different perspective on you. A few tips. Detailed is better. And they should not be repetitive of things that can be found in other parts of your application. So it's not long that matters. Sometimes we get these very, very long letters, but all they're doing is a paragraph long description of the class. They'll just cut and paste big chunks from your resume. They'll just say a whole bunch of stuff without really saying much about the applicant at all. Sometimes you'll get these amazing short letters where they just tell you so much about the applicant in just a paragraph or two. We want to know about you as a student, as a contributor to an academic community, and to the extent they can speak about it as a person. That's really what matters and what stands out. They're also great people to speak about unique features of your academic program. So if you're at a school where there's grade deflation, or if you're in a program at a school where they have a specifically tight grading curve, if you put that in an addendum, that sounds like you're whining and you're making excuses. If your professor says it in a letter, it sounds awesome. So if they say this person really challenged themselves, they took graduate level coursework, and they never took classes just with grades, they were always taking the hardest professors. Wow, I'm really impressed by that. You put that in an addendum, not a good look. So sometimes the messenger matters more than the message. This is something where you should really work on building these relationships, helping them understand what we're looking for. And for Yale Law School in particular, we want academic letters really above all else. I know some law schools and certainly some graduate schools are looking for professional letters instead of or in addition to. For us, the academic letters are the highest priority. Okay, I'm almost done, I promise. Some common mistakes. Choose wisely. Just like Brianna said, we don't want to hear from family, friends, relatives, peers. We get the craziest ones sometimes. We don't care about fancy names. I get letters from like I mean, it's always fun when I get like a letter from someone fancy. I always tell my mom, I'm like, oh my God, I just like got a letter from like George Bush. If they don't know you, they didn't teach you, they weren't like a close supervisor, it doesn't help. For real, it doesn't help. So it's always substance over signature. Stop when you're ahead. If we say 2 to 4 and you have 2 great ones, don't get like a mediocre third or fourth. Again, shorter letters are better. It's really hard to read a 3-page letter. Better to have a super strong 1 page where we can really focus on every word than to bury the good stuff in with 2 pages of filler. I'm so tired of reading top 1% student when the person has a B. It's just not true. I don't believe you. And once someone has said that, they've lost credibility. So make sure that like there's not like hyperbole that isn't backed up. Period. Okay. That one's one of my my pet peeves. Resumes. I used to give whole presentations on resumes, so I'm gonna keep this super short. 1 to 2 pages, there should be white space. It's really meant for the reader to be able to very clearly and quickly see your education and experiences. Keep the sections minimized. Experience, education. Once you start to have lots of sections, it's very hard to follow the chronology because things are really broken up. Fewer sections makes the chronology and its reverse chronology really easy to follow. Typos are even less appropriate in a resume because it should be a professional document you're using in lots of other contexts. Really check for formatting consistency. If you're using an M dash, use M dashes, not an N dash here or there. If you're not italicizing the commas, don't italicize the commas. Like, I'm a former litigator. Like, I will notice these kinds of things. Like, they jump out at me and burn my eyes. I can't help it from like years of writing federal court briefs. Just really like look through it, not just for professional skill applications, just in general. This is the document where the formatting and those little things matter the most. And again, education and experience is most important. For descriptions, you want to keep them brief. You can have it bulleted, you can have it sentences. Always start with an active verb. That's really important. Examples can be really powerful. Numbers can be really powerful. And everything else is sort of optional. I'm not a big fan of the additional information thing at the bottom. I think it's actually biasing and a little weird. Some people love it. I kind of hate it, but that, people have different views. Skills, if you're going to include skills, it should be unusual skills. Like, please don't include like, Microsoft Office Suite or things that everyone, Zoom, that everyone does. All right, resumes. I think that's it. Was I on time? Oh my God, I actually was. Shocking. Ask me lots of questions. Happy to talk more about anything I talked about: financial aid, school selection, what law school is, practicing law, private sector, public sector, all of that jazz. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now and share.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That was extremely insightful. And now we'll finish up our panel presentations with Dorothy.
Great, thank you. Okay, all right. First, I just want to say thanks to Brianna and Miriam, because I am not an admissions person, so I cannot give you that kind of really granular information about how to apply. What I can give you is, some information about what is a degree in public health, because it's an exceedingly broad field, and just some general guidance on applying as well. But here we go. First, I just want to start with a little bit about ASPPH, the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. We're a membership organization, and we represent, hold on, let me just move this over. There we go. We represent 138 schools and programs of public health that are accredited by the Council on Education for Public Health, or CEF. Most of them are in the US, but we do have 5 international schools and programs as well. Our vision is of improved health and well-being for everyone, everywhere. And our mission is to advance academic public health by mobilizing the collective power of our members to drive excellence and innovation in education, research, and practice. So before I actually start to talk about degrees in public health, I want to talk about what are the skills that you need to be successful in your career, regardless of what that career is. And I do want to emphasize that really talking about skills. We are not just talking about knowledge. So a recent report from McKinsey & Company looked at what foundational skills people need for the future of work, regardless of profession. And what they found is that people really need translational skills that can benefit them across different jobs and even across different careers. Specialized skills can be taught or learned on site, but having a foundation of translational skills is really, really important. The good news is that a liberal arts degree really does help to develop at least entry-level competence in a lot of those skills. So I just want to look really quickly at some of the skills a little bit more closely. And before everybody starts frantically taking notes, if you're planning on doing that, I did share these slides with Anne and Delaney, and so they can share them with you as well. So first, we need to know how to think and work professionally. Skills like communication, critical thinking, and an appreciation of lifelong learning will help you to be successful no matter what profession you go into. We need to interact well with others. Humility, empathy, and inclusiveness are some examples. And I want to note that a number of these are skills that are hard to teach, and they need to be learned through experience. People often use the term soft skills, but these are absolutely some of the hardest skills to learn and the ones that are going to benefit you the most. We need to know how to manage ourselves to be successful. So skills like integrity, wellness, and passion, coping with uncertainty has shown to be especially critical during the pandemic. And finally, we need to be competent with current technology and be able to adapt to future technology, which fortunately younger generations really have a leg up on. And we also need to know how to use it personally and teach it to others. Okay, so now that we're talking about all of those foundational skills, why are we going to talk about public health next? One of the reasons is that you can really gain or strengthen a lot of these important skills by pursuing an advanced degree in public health. All CEF accredited schools and programs of public health must meet standards for what they teach their students. So I would like to now re-emphasize what Brianna said about do not always pay attention to rankings. It is not always an objective process. So in addition to specific public health skills like epidemiology or health policy, education and public health focuses on competencies in things like project management, communication, leadership, data analysis that can benefit any type of career. And public health education is also really focused on things like group work, experiential learning, and practical experience in communities so that students can develop those harder to teach skills like collaboration and cultural competence. Working in public health has a lot of other benefits. Most of us in public health embarked on this career because we can focus on what we're passionate about, we can do meaningful work, and our contributions have a large impact. If we look at the data really quick, we can see that there has been an increasing interest in public health over time. The number of graduates has increased and the number of programs has increased. And the pandemic really increased visibility for public health and demonstrated its importance. So from 2020 to 2021, our applications increased by 40%, which is massive. Importantly, the diversity of our applicants also increased during this period of time as the pandemic highlighted really dramatic health inequities in this country and globally. The diversity aspect is essential. It's something that we in public health are really focused on. And and it's important to ensure an effective workforce. We did a recent study of graduate outcomes, found that healthcare organizations are the largest employers of public health graduates, but when you break it down, you can see that there are significant differences based on level of education. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, the reality is that as more people recognize the value of public health professionals, new and innovative careers are developing. A public health perspective can bring important insights to many sectors, and it helps to ensure that potential impacts on health are considered regardless of what sector you're in. There's also a huge national and global focus on building the public health workforce right now, with the goal of having a competent, sustainable workforce, so we're better prepared for the next pandemic than we were for this one. So this is a really good time to get into public health, and it's also an essential time to get into public health. Okay, so now that I have convinced all of you to consider an advanced degree and a career in public health, I want to go over some resources where you can learn more about different opportunities, because the field, like I said, is extremely broad. First, a little note on degrees. There are a lot of different types, and you can see them here, and they prepare you for different types of careers. So the Master in Public Health, or the MPH, is pretty much our flagship degree. It's by far the most common and the most broadly applicable. It's also considered a professional degree because it prepares you to go directly to work in the field. A Master of Science degree is often more research focused and can be a stepping stone to a doctoral degree. An MHA, or a Master's of Health Administration, is also a professional degree, and it's specifically geared toward developing skills in management and leadership for health service delivery. Joint degrees are also extremely common, especially with MDs, veterinary degrees, social work, law. I don't think I've seen one with international affairs, but it does seem like it would go together well. And there's a lot of different ones out there. And so then we move on to the doctoral level, where there are really only two types. The Doctor of Public Health, or the DRPH, prepares you to enter leadership positions in public health practice. And the Doctor of Philosophy, the PhD, is heavily research focused and generally leads to academic or research positions. So as I mentioned, public health is an extremely broad field. Everybody will have the same foundational skills and knowledge because that's a requirement. But you can also specialize in a lot of different areas. So these are a few of them. There are a lot more. I've seen lists of like 50 or more different concentrations that you can focus on. And you can learn about all of them by using the Academic Program Finder, which is on the ASPPH website. You can search by a lot of different fields or just a keyword, and be aware that sometimes programs can use different names to mean basically the same concentration. So if you find something that you're interested in, spend some time searching for different variations to make sure that you know all of the options. You can also compare programs and learn about career options in our digital review book. Another way to learn more is by talking with our student ambassadors. We feature a number of them on their website. You can learn more about what they're studying, and you can connect with them through social media as well. We hold virtual career fairs starting in July, where you can meet with admissions staff from different institutions. You can meet with current students, you can meet with recent graduates, and maybe this year we'll actually be able to start having in-person graduate fairs again. Fingers crossed. I don't think we have any planned yet, though. And if you want to find out more about them, you can follow our social media, and you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which is called the Friday Letter. These are our social media handles. This is Public Health, is one of our major communications campaigns. It's geared toward prospective and current students, but you can also follow ASPPH itself on social. Okay, and then last on just kind of the resources for how to learn about public health. TIPH has a book club. It's open to anybody. These are some of the books that they've read in the past. There are a lot more. They're really interesting. They have discussions with the author afterward. So they're good opportunities to learn about different aspects of public health, and you can go to Goodreads to find out more about them. Okay, now we're going to talk about the financing part. Not in a lot of detail, again, because I am not a admissions specialist. However, we all need to admit, like Brianna and Miriam said, getting your graduate degree, it is not cheap. And regardless of what we think about that, that is just how it is. So there are a lot of variability, though, in the tuition rates. So you can kind of look at that as well. ASPPH provides guidance on how to finance your degree. This is the website. We have a database of scholarships that are available to students. Some of them are public health focused, some of them are not. And we curate these annually during the summer. And then individual institutions, much like my other co-panels were saying, might offer scholarship opportunities to accepted applicants. So you need to research those as well. And what I really want to talk a little bit more about is loans. The reality is that the majority of us are probably going to have some sort of loan at some point. So there are some options available now, and one that we really hope is going to be available soon that could be a benefit. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, PSLF. You may have already heard of this one. It's an active program. It provides loan forgiveness after 10 years or 120 payments if you have qualifying loans and work in either the US government at any level or a nonprofit. And then an opportunity that ASPPH is advocating strongly for right now is the Public Health Loan Repayment Program. That's been passed by the House and it's been introduced in the Senate as part of the Prevent Pandemics Act. The legislation would provide loan repayment for up to $35,000 per year for 3 years if you commit to working at a local, state, or tribal health department during that time. It would only be open to those with degrees in public health, health professions, or information science-related fields. You can learn more about both of the programs by going to the websites that are listed here. And if you want to reach out to your senator or congressman about the Public Health Loan Repayment Program, I certainly encourage you to do so. If you're not sure about an advanced degree and you want to learn more, there are a number of different options that are available for undergraduate students to get experience in public health. These are just a few of them. There are definitely more. We're really excited at ASPPH because we are hosting 4 interns through Health Career Connection this summer, which is a great opportunity. All right, and then to close out the section on resources, if you want to get an idea of what types of jobs are available and their qualifications, or if you are ready to look for a job in public health right now with your undergraduate degree, which there are certainly opportunities for, you can check out the Public Health Jobs Search Engine, which ASPPH manages. Oops. Okay. So to close the presentation, I'm going to talk briefly about how to apply. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I think Brianna and Miriam have really covered a lot of that very well. The best option to apply to a school or program of public health is SOFIS, the Centralized Application Service for CEF accredited schools and programs of public health. About 120 of our members participate in SOFIS, and it functions kind of like the Common App for those institutions. Some programs are not members of SOFIS, and you can find out which ones are and how to apply to the ones that aren't by going through the academic program finder. These are the different parts of the SOFIS application. They're all important. These are the general recommendations. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but some of the things that I just want to emphasize are, if there's a program you're particularly interested in, contact their admissions office and see if they have guidance. Check whether the GRE is required or if they offer waivers. Some don't require it at all, some do. Some will, offer a waiver so that you don't have to. And on the resume portion, it's really important to highlight volunteer experiences in addition to work experiences as professional experience. Oh no, I was at the place where I wanted to be. Okay. So your statement of purpose, I think that the others covered it really well. But my main points here are really tailor it. Don't submit the same kind of general one to every school that you apply to. And check to see if there are specific prompts that you have to respond to, or if it's just kind of open-ended. And I know it's been said before, have at least one other person read your statement before you submit it. This is the general timeline for fall enrollment applications. The new SOFIS application cycle opens mid-August. Most of the deadlines are rolling, but some of them do have specific dates. So you really have to pay attention to the individual programs you're interested in. April 15th is usually when financial aid requests are due. And very important, do not wait until the deadline to submit. Do not wait until a week before the deadline to request your transcripts and your letters. These things take time. You absolutely need to plan ahead of time, or else you're not going to get it in for the deadline. Okay, and that's all. I hope it's been a good introduction. Thank you for inviting me today. Happy to answer questions, and my contact information is also here if you have any questions later.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for that overview of how to apply to public health programs, and if you should. So we're now going to open this up to questions. My colleague, Mackenzie Cole, is reviewing the chat, and we're going to call on students to ask their questions. You can also raise your hand if you haven't had an opportunity to chat, and we can get you into the mix as well.
Like Jonah, you have a question.
Yeah, so thank you guys. Thank you for talking today. One of the questions I think, and Miriam talked about this for like a moment, but all of us are pretty familiar at this point with the college application process, and maybe if you might be able to speak about, any of you might be able to speak about some conceptions we probably have of a college application process that don't apply to a graduate school application process, or ways to think about graduate school applications differently than some of the ways we probably thought about college applications.
I can start it.
Oh, yeah, you go ahead.
Or no, you. Okay, I'll start it just generally. Again, with your undergrad, they're expecting you right now to have a total idea of where you're headed. A graduate school application, you need to have it be focused into what you want to do moving forward. So again, think of it as you're going to graduate school for a specific master's in whatever you're interested in. So they want to see that you've thought through why you would be heading to this program to get to this degree, that you've thought through what your profession is. Even if you don't know exactly what it is that you want to do, you should have some general idea. Again, it has to be a little bit more tailored than an undergrad application. Hence why through the personal statements, they want to see a little bit more of the narrative, of how you became interested in this specific field, why you're choosing to go to graduate school. Why is it that without this degree, you can't get to that next step? And as I mentioned in the presentation, you're going to have a lot more deadlines, and it's a lot less hand-holding through the graduate school application process. So some schools may not even reach out if you've not submitted a completed application. It just won't be reviewed. To a certain extent, you're an adult by the point that you're applying to graduate school, so they are expecting a higher level of detail, understanding that you've done your research than it would be in the undergrad process. And that's very general, but Miriam or Dorothy, either of you can jump in and go a little bit more in depth in that.
I was going to say the same thing. Like, I think law school, some people apply because they don't know what to do after college. Law school is not the continuation of a liberal arts education. You go to law school to be trained to be a lawyer. Lots of people who, including myself with a law degree, don't always stay as a lawyer, but that doesn't mean that I would have been successful with law school applications by just saying, oh, I just want to continue, my great undergrad education. That's not going to work. You have to have a reason. I think, especially at least at the very top law schools, it's not just about, and this is true, I think, of the top undergrads too, it's not just about numbers. Like, we're looking for, we're looking for people who feel formed. I always say there's like a sense of formedness to really strong applicants that goes really beyond the numbers, where it feels like it fits together, they make sense, what they've done, what they're doing, what they say they want to do, it all kind of resonates. That doesn't mean that there can't have been detours along the way, or that there can't have been times where they maybe, it doesn't all have to be tied neatly with a bow, but it does have to feel like it's gelled at this moment in time. And it can be a consistent narrative story, it can be a pivot story, but it has to have reached a formedness by the time when we're reading it. And it's not just enough to like have the numbers. That's not going to cut it at our level, at least.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next hand we had was Sora. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you everyone so much for taking your time to talk to us. I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what happened. Sorry. I just had like two quick questions, one for Brianna and one for Miriam, if that's okay. So for Brianna, I guess I can just go first. So I know that some people who are interested in like international relations, for example, like myself, like, sorry, let me just put this on Do Not Disturb. I don't know why. Yeah, sorry. I know some people do an MPP and some people do a Master's in International like Affairs, for example. Like, what are the differences between the two? Is one like more broad and then you can tailor your MPP towards like IR stuff, or is like, or should like you should just unconditionally do a Master's in International Affairs if you are like interested in IR for sure, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no. Ultimately, what it comes down to a lot of the times is the school itself and the way that they've titled the degree. And I believe either Miriam or I think it was Dorothy that mentioned it, that some degrees are ultimately the same thing. At one school, maybe an MPP, and at another school, it's just a MA in that specific field. So what I would recommend is looking exactly at the skills and the courses that you're going to be taking in whatever school that you're interested in within that degree, because that gives you an idea of the skills that you're going to be learning and attaining in that program, and it'll help guide you a little bit more as to whether it's the MPP or the MA that you're interested. And the MA is a little bit more general, obviously. It opens you up to a lot more topics that you can combine and mix, while an MPP obviously is a Master's in Public Policy and narrows you down a little bit more. But ultimately, I would recommend just looking at what the degree at that specific school is and what are the programs and the courses that you would be taking, and compare that to the MA at another school that you're interested in and see what the courses you're interested in. They are different, but sometimes depending on the school, they may ultimately be the same. So I know that that answer isn't totally helpful, but I'm happy to go more in depth at the general differences of the MA and the MPP overall.
No, thank you so much. And then, sorry, I just have one quick question for Miriam, if that's okay. So obviously law is just so broad, and I guess like when you are applying for law school, is there like a section where you indicate like what kind of law you want to practice, or is it kind of like in your application, like this is what I want to do with a law degree, and then when you get to law school, you can tailor your classes around a specific or get a certificate in a specific like field of law, if that makes sense?
I think different schools handle it differently. I mean, we definitely don't have certificates or sort of concentrations or majors the way you would have an undergrad, but, you know, we definitely have some students where they will focus their attention on, you know, international law, for example, and they'll be in a, you know, human rights clinic and they'll take a lot of international law focused classes. And then others will really just take a pretty broad range of classes. Some applicants will come in with a PhD or a graduate degree or an MA or an MPH, for example, and they will know exactly what they want to do with a law degree. You know, they'll be like, I'm an MPH. I've been working at this Centers for, you know, Medicaid for 3 years. I'm coming. I want to do health law. This is my thing. And that will make perfect sense. Others will be coming straight from undergrad and they'll be much more amorphous about what they want, and that's what will feel and read as authentic for them. So I think it's pretty varied, and I think you don't want to force it in a way that starts to feel like, wow, like I'm really telling, not showing, if there's not a lot to back it up. Um, and that's totally fine too. For someone with less experience, if you do have a lot of experience and you know, it definitely makes sense to really be clear about where you're coming from and what you want to do with the law degree. And it's also totally fine to change your mind, and some people do that. For some, it's more like I'm interested in appellate litigation or administrative law, which is an umbrella that covers a lot of different topic areas. Or both of those are umbrellas that cover a lot of different topic areas, for example.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you. I think Brandon, you are the next question.
Thank you. My question is for Miriam. You suggested that we asked if we were curious about the equity issue that you mentioned during your presentation. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah,
And
yeah, sure. That came up with the YYLS, why I don't want YYLS, right?
yeah, and before you answer that, just a quick comment related to that. We are currently sitting at Georgetown University, and we know that there was a law professor who was let go from the university for making disparaging comments regarding preparedness of African-American students in law
Yes.
school.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, as part of the admissions process, what has the admissions done to ensure that they have high quality students, regardless of color or these issues, so
Yeah.
that we can kind of get past this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very broad and challenging question, I think, you know, not just for law school, but, you know, in in the wider world, but I'll do my best to answer it. So the reason why I don't like to have a YYLS question is I feel like it privileges people who are connected and from, you know, Yale adjacent communities. So, you know, so if you went to Yale for undergrad and you have a whole bunch of friends who are attending Yale Law School, or, you know, other sort of similarly like quote unquote elite schools, you probably can write a really good YYLS paragraph that's going to really resonate not just with me, but we have a faculty review process. And that's no knock on that. Like we admit tons of amazing people actually from very different backgrounds, you know, there's a wide range of people from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds and racial and ethnic and other backgrounds at elite schools. And I think colleges have done a very good job of diversifying in many ways too. But it's a certain type of educational background. If you're coming from a school that is very different from Yale and you don't know a single person who's at Yale Law School, you don't know a single lawyer in your family, how are you going to write a YYLS paragraph? You're going to go to my website, you're going to find some generic marketing copy, which someone wrote, and you're going to, you know, massage it and you're going to stick it into a paragraph. Our website is not always up to date. It's really hard to tell which faculty members are visitors and which are not. And I've read those paragraphs and sometimes they seem like really off. I don't put any weight on them, but what if it goes to a faculty member and it says, the reason I want to come to Yale is because I want to study with, and it names 2 people who are visitors. I can see some faculty being like, oh, you want to come to Yale? Those people teach at Cornell, like go to Cornell. So I always advise people like, don't go there. Don't write that paragraph. It doesn't say anything about you. I know my school. We know our school so well that anything that's not quite right is really going to resonate as not right. The people who are going to have a much better chance of getting that right are people who are from like quote unquote elite backgrounds. And I just don't think it adds much. Why am I making you jump through that hoop? Why am I making you waste like half a page of 2 pages telling me about myself? And frankly, it's super boring to read like dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Schools do it to yield protect. They want you to jump through that hoop so that they can get a better sense of who's going to come, so they can try to like drive up their yields. Like, I don't want to yield protect in that way. I don't think it's a value add for me. I'm also in a privileged position because of where we sit in the rankings, where like protecting yield is not like my highest and best use of my time. I'd rather try to yield people by convincing them once I admit them that this is a great fit for them, and connecting them to my alums and my current students and my faculty members, and really showing them what a great community we have. So that's my rant on that. In terms of your question of like, what can we do so that we can try to make sure we have, people who are going to come in are going to be able to speak about, we had a really difficult, a decision that's difficult for many people come down from the Supreme Court today, right? This is a tough day for a lot of people, not for everyone. Some people are celebrating and other people are feeling, really sick about it. That's the law, right? Like that impacts like every person in this country for generations. That's going to impact every person in this country. And the law like really shapes our society. And I think what we try to do is find people who aren't always going to agree, but are going to be able to speak collegially across difference and collaboratively across difference. And as our former dean, who was a judge, said, get to know each other as people before getting to know each other's politics, so they can have those conversations in a way that is respectful. But it's really hard. It's really hard. And I don't want to get into what happened at Georgetown. That's someone else's school, and not my place to speak about. But we're not perfect in every ways, but I think we try always really hard to strive to be better, to strive to have a really diverse community in a way that's really like meaningful diversity, not just paper diversity, and where our students on really hard topics that are really personal to lots of people can really talk to each other about them. And we're not always successful, but we can always try. And I think we're successful most of the time, but it's really, really, really hard. And our society is in a really tough place where it's hard at large. And because the law is such a deep part of that, it's really hard at law schools in general, not, and that's tough. That's tough. I don't know if that answered it. I hope it did, at least a little bit.
No, thank you. Just a real quick, I know you don't want to talk about the Georgetown thing, but I mention it because I've heard it at other universities from other professors as well. So I'm wondering if this is not unique to Georgetown, but in fact, there may be a culture within elite institutions, maybe even law schools, but other institutions as well. So I was just curious to see if there was just more chatter on a global level about that.
Yeah, I think they're like, sure. Like, I think that there are people who say like really like horrible, inappropriate things everywhere. I think it is an extremely small minority is my sense of it, of people saying things that I view as abhorrent and inappropriate personally. I think it's never okay, even when it's just a little bit. I don't think that saying stuff like that is ever okay. I think it's really important that it's called out and when it is said, and that, appropriate steps are taken, but I also think as intellectual communities, it's also really important that we're able to have really hard discussions on really controversial topics. I'm not saying that's what happened there. And it can sometimes, there's a really fine line sometimes between saying things that are really hard to hear, but that are part of an intellectual discussion. And then there's the just saying absolutely abhorrent things that are unacceptable under any circumstances. And it's really tough. And I think a lot of educational institutions are really struggling with being educational institutions and really being respectful of free speech, which is so critical to what we all do, but also being really mindful of how damaging words can be to people, especially people from certain communities and underrepresented communities, and really being really careful. So these are really, really hard topics. Yeah, without speaking specifically to the Georgetown situation, which I just am not attuned to enough, but it's tough. These topics are really tough ones. And the values are really deep and important ones.
I think I've got Muskan. Can you go next?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to ask, I guess, when you have like a couple of candidates and they're kind of like in your mind, like equal and you love them both, what like is going through your head when you kind of have to make that decision between like, what are you kind of looking for when you have to make that decision to kind of distinguish them or like choose one? Does that make sense?
Who is that, for me or to someone else?
Sure, yeah, like
Oh,
yes.
okay, I'm happy to have someone else talk. Yeah, I mean, it's rarely like that. It's rarely that you have two like identical people that you're choosing between. It's, you know, that's only like in the interview where you give the hypothetical to the interview candidate. It's just not realistic. Like applicants are not that similar to each other. You're really trying to balance a class as a whole. And so it rarely comes down to, I mean, look, there's always a moment where you're admitting the last person. And yes, it's like tough to say like this person and not that person, but that it's not generally like a head-to-head battle of like applicant versus applicant. I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I saw this in the chat, but I'm going to have you ask it out loud as well, just so we have it for the recording. James, could you ask the question that you asked in the chat for us all?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just in what situations, if any, would you recommend taking a gap year and working before going to grad school?
And I can answer that from, yeah, I can start that off since I answered in the chat. We usually do say that you should take at least a year off. That's not to say you can't go directly from undergrad. About 25% of current AFCEA graduates are straight from undergrad, but we say that a year off at least is good. One, it gives you the ability to gain professional experience, work in whatever fields that you're interested in if it's possible. And it gives you really good insight into what you're actually interested in versus what you think you're interested in. So for example, in my case, I thought I was interested in international development. And so I worked in international development after graduation and then realized I did not like international development at all. And that changed my path. And so again, a year or more gives you that professional experience. A lot of graduate schools will look for you to have professional experience. Some actually require a certain number of professional experience years before you apply. So it gives you that, and it gives you that insight into what you are actually interested in and passionate about, rather than what you think you were interested in because you read it off of a book. You know, gives you that practice, that practical application of your interests.
And if I could just build on what Brianna said, I totally agree. I mean, I took time off. Lots of people that I know did, but it's definitely not a requirement. And I think that it has a lot to do with your personal circumstances. But I think one of the most important questions is to ask yourself is, you're about to potentially invest a lot of money into this degree. Are you positive that this is what you want to do? Are you positive that this degree is going to get you where you want to go? And if you're not, then maybe, you know, getting some experience is a good move to figure it out a little bit more. But also, you know, there are some years that like, is the job market terrible? Are you not going to be able to get a job? You know, so there's so many different things to consider here. But yeah, I would, from the practical standpoint, I would definitely say it's a lot of money to invest. Be sure that it's what you really want.
Thank you.
I'm only gonna say one more thing to that. I went straight through, so I'm like the exception. applicants tend to get stronger over time. So strong applicants only get stronger. It's very unusual for an applicant to get weaker. It happens, like if you spend a year just kind of doodling around and doing nothing, like that's not a great look, but you will almost certainly be a stronger applicant with some experience, which isn't to say you wouldn't be strong enough to be admitted without it, but it generally only helps.
Thank you. All right, I think we have 2 last questions here.
And I see one from Catherine about going test optional, which I feel like is probably worth a quick shout out.
Oh, great. If you see that, you can shout that out real quick.
Yeah, so Catherine asks about the ABA's proposal to eliminate standardized tests, which is not yet a thing. They'll make a decision this summer. I don't have a great sense yet of what that's going to do. I don't think anyone does. I suspect some schools will then go test optional and others will not. That's like my best guess. I certainly don't know what we would do in that scenario. But yeah, I do think that will open the door, at least for some schools, to admit people without a standardized test, but no one knows for sure yet. That's like a total hypothesis and not on the basis of any insider information at all.
Noelle, do you want to come off mute and share your question?
Hello, you sort of answered it in terms of like why taking a gap year helps, but I was wondering, I know from my informational interviews of my career field, one of the hiring managers was like, we would, I try very hard to find resumes that have real life work experience, like waitressing or, like genuine work experiences as opposed to just the academic realm. Is that something that's like, if there's only so much space on a resume, should we be prioritizing real life experiences or should we be prioritizing like our academic experience? Because like, especially with law school, it seems more intellectual. I don't know if it's more experience-based soft skills that you're gaining from real world, or if it's like the academic stuff that it's a competitive academic school, you're training to be a lawyer, that's more a valuable asset.
I think we're pretty agnostic as to what people do. I don't know, my head of career office is like, more paralegals, please, because I think that they do great when they do law firm recruiting. But I suspect, different faculty members reviewing would have different feelings. It feels like an MPhil at Cambridge or Oxford is like de rigueur among a certain like set of applicants now. It's like become increasingly common. I don't know how I feel about that, positive or negative or neutral, but people seem to be like routinely getting like just a master's, a humanities master's now, which seems, I'm not totally sure what's behind that. Maybe that is the continuation of the liberal arts education in a way that law school is not. I don't think you should do anything, whether it's extracurricular or job or anything else, just because you think it's going to help you get into grad school of any kind. I think everything you should be doing should be because you're genuinely interested in it, because you think you're going to gain skills, you're going to gain knowledge, you're going to learn about what you care about, you're going to learn whether you enjoy it. That's what we care about. We care about people who seem authentic and real and passionate and like whole people. If what you want to do is, I don't know, lead hiking trips for, underprivileged youth, like go do that. If what you want to do is go be a paralegal because you want to investigate appellate litigation, do that. If you're really juiced up about Dante and you want to do a master's and write about the Inferno, go do that. Like there is no right or wrong. And like, to be frank, like some people need to work to make money because they need to support their family or pay off their loans. And like, that's awesome and totally real life too. You need to be a caregiver for your family and make some money and pay down your debt and help out your mom or help out your younger siblings. Do that. And there's not a single negative thing about just saying, I need to make some money for a couple of years. And we have total respect for that too. And that same thing goes for working in college to make money rather than, doing a whole bunch of fancy internships. Like we expressly ask about that on our application because we care about that just as much.
And just to add to that, again, those experiences give you skills that others may not have had.
Yes.
And those are things that you should be adding on your personal statement that actually sets you apart. Ultimately, when admissions committees are reading your applications and they see that you're doing so much, right, it almost seems like you have no focus, right? So if you're coming to a school with an application with a resume that's like, I did this and I did this and I did this and I did that, rather than showing why you're interested in this one specific topic, right? It shows that almost you have no focus and you're trying to pad up your resume to make it seem that you're constantly busy. Again, focus on the things you're really interested in, whether that is, hiking, whether that's working in this particular nonprofit. Focus on those interests, because that's, again, is going to give you an insight into what you're actually really interested in doing moving down the line. And don't look at those opportunities, not opportunities, but those experiences you've had of being a caregiver, of having to work to pay off loans as a negative. It actually shows, again, it gives you skills that you may not necessarily think of being of importance are of actual importance. It shows, again, you're conscientious of the things that you need to do, shows that you're resilient. And I hate using the word resilient, honestly, but it's one of the things that they tend to talk about. But again, don't look down on those needs of making money. I was one of those people, so I understand that struggle.
Yeah. I think it's really important to do what you have to do and what you care about doing, and to make sure that you express that in a whole real way. It's like, we want to understand holistically who you are, but also the context in which you are who you are, and like those things are part of your context and they matter a great deal to admissions committees.
Thank you.
All right,
Oh.
we are a little over time. Panelists, do you have a moment for one more question?
Yes, and Brandon, consultants. No, I don't think that consultants are necessary, period, full stop. And I do not think generally that there is a necessary correlation between the quality of an application and the use of consultants. I'm not saying there's like a correlation that it doesn't improve it, but that's not my experience of it. I think one of the other panelists said something about make sure people read your application. And I think that's really important, is to have readers, other than yourself, read it. I do recommend an editing service like a Fiverr, like have like a professional editor spend like, $50 or something to have someone read through it for typos. I think can be wise as like a final proofread type thing, or have your colleges, if you're still in school, editing service, if you have access to that, I think can be wise. But I think hiring a professional consultant, I think, can be anxiety reducing. If you have endless funds and you want to have your anxiety reduced and have someone to walk you through and hold your hand through every step, like, great. But I don't think it necessarily isn't in any way necessary or improves the quality. I do recommend it for test prep. I think if you're going to law school and you have money, it is worth saving up for LSAT prep for sure. That is a very important component, and I hate to say it, but there are great free resources like Khan Academy available, but I think going to a really solid test prep company, a test masters kind of company, is really, and there's others too, is worth it to try to get your score up and maximize scholarship opportunities.
The one final question, I believe, Eiler, you had your hand up. Are you still wanting to ask your question?
Yeah. So you guys emphasized the importance of that personal narrative and personal statement. And I just was wondering how we can balance the not underselling our skills and achievements, but also not overselling, trying to, impress everyone and whatnot. Whether you had any tips or maybe resources on that.
I think ultimately you have to think of the narrative connecting the dots for the admissions committee, right? For me, I think there's no such thing as overselling. I think most students tend to undersell at a certain point and think, again, they downplay some of the experience. They downplay, I was a caregiver. They downplay some of the things they needed to do. Ultimately, what you have to do is just connect the dots. How did you get to this interest? How did you get to this program? What are you looking to do based on the things you've done in the past? Whether that is the pivot, as Miriam said, which usually is a great story in itself, whether it is that straight shot that some students have, whatever that story is, you have to reflect really on like what led you here. What was it about whatever you went through, whatever experiences you've had and opportunities you've been afforded, or opportunities that you weren't afforded, that actually closed some doors that were closed on you and that moved you towards this other thing. How has it led you to this moment right now? And why have you chosen to pursue this path? Again, one of the things students tend to also go down the route is because the job market is bleak. That's not a great narrative. But again, think of those things, think of yourself in that narrative and why these programs are a fit for you as well. Students also tend to focus on why they're a fit for the school, but the schools also want to read how they're a fit for you, how they come into play within your larger, professional trajectory. So, again, I don't think there's such a thing as overselling too much. Obviously, no one wants to be like, I was a scholar here and I did this and I did that, because that's not the narrative. Again, as Miriam said, you want to show rather than tell. Show me what that move did for you. Show me what you're interested in. Show me why. Show me how this has become, how you become who you are and how you where you want to move forward, and how this degree fits into all of that. Miriam, Dorothy, anything you wanted to add to
I'm going
that?
to give
Or
two
that I
very
missed?
specific, like how to know if you're overselling tips. One is look at the number of I statements in your personal statement. If every sentence or almost every sentence is like an I statement, it might be too much. Like sometimes we'll read it and we call that being too into your own narrative. That's the phrase my team will use. We'll read an application and we'll be like, ooh, too into their own narrative. And it tends to be when it's just a series of I, and it just resonates very poorly. The other one, and this is usually on resumes or in our activities section, is when almost everything is, one of 4 people selected for a whatever, highly prestigious, whatever. It's okay. Like some things are. If you're a Rhodes, you don't need to say, one of 52 Americans selected for highly prestigious Rhodes Fellowship. You can just say Rhodes. And if you feel like you're constantly adding in this like language about how prestigious and selective and one of everything is on your resume, maybe read through it and check it a little bit, because that can sometimes just read poorly to the reader. And that's unusual. Those are 2 things that are pretty unusual things, and you just don't want to be in that category.
Yeah.
The opposite is more likely the case, as Brianna said, of people not selling themselves enough.
I completely agree. I think you're more likely not to sell yourself because you don't want to come off as boastful, which I think is your whole point in asking this question anyway. Having somebody else read it, somebody who's like not your mom, who can give you kind of an honest perspective of like, whoa, you've gone really over the top here or not, or hey, you did all these things that you didn't even talk about, can help with that. And the other thing that I would like to echo from what Miriam said before is, don't go overboard on like the emotional like roller coaster of, it was so dramatic and all, like that. Slightly different than boastful, but I feel like still kind of in the same category. Most people, I feel, aren't going to be receptive to something like that. It feels very over the top. It's much better to talk about those kinds of experiences, which we all have, which are absolutely relevant to your statement, as factual events and how they impacted your decisions, and in that regard.
What a wonderful piece of advice, Dorothy, for us to end on today. You've given us so many different insider tips, I think, that are extremely helpful for students as they begin to embark on this process for planning for graduate school. On behalf of the Society, I just want to thank you for sharing your expertise, your time, and wisdom with a group of students. I know they're extremely appreciative, as am I. So thank you so much for joining us today.